What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We are going to be talking about America, home of the homeless.
Yeah, I mean, who needs the brave when you have the homeless, you know?
Yep.
We got lots of them.
We got a lot of them. And we've got a great guest today, Reed Olson. He is running for State House and has some community organizing experience working with trying to deal with homelessness on a local level and some of the stuff that can scale up. So we're going to let him plug his campaign a little bit, but I figured he was a good person to have on weighing in about this this topic that we try to keep our eyes straight and ignore at the stoplights. So let's get into it. Reed.
What? Just getting right into the feels there. You ever given any money to people on the side of the street stoplight like that?
No, I haven't.
I've given one time. I got an extra McDouble or extra burger at McDonald's. I gave one time. He was pretty happy about that. I've given a little bit of cash.
Yeah, I mean that's good. That's big of you. I always wonder if it's helping or hurting the situation. I guess I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a privatized UBI essentially.
Yeah, I suppose. But anyway, Reed, let's get you joined in here. Why don't you introduce yourself, kind of tell everybody who you are, give us your little elevator pitch on your running and your background and your experience, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for letting me come on the show and talk about my campaign, and about homelessness and housing issues in my community specifically. But I think that what we experience here in our town of 15,000 is duplicated all across America. Yeah, so I am the executive director of an organization called the Nameless Coalition for the Homeless. We operate an overnight emergency shelter called The Wolf, and a daytime drop-in center, which is where I am right now, called the New Day Center. And I originally, professionally, I've been a cook. I have a degree in history, and at my graduation party, my parents gave me a knife set because that's what I've always been doing, and that's what I've done. I own a small restaurant here in Bemidji. In 2013, I went to a community meeting after a couple of unhoused people in our community died of preventable deaths, alcohol-related and weather-related deaths. Be careful what meetings you go to, because now 12 years later, 11 years later, I'm the executive director of the organization that formed out of those kind of grassroots, spontaneous meetings of looking at our community, seeing a rise in the amount of unsheltered people living downtown, and trying to figure out what we could do to prevent the deaths. Because for a while we were seeing 3 or 4 weather-related deaths every winter, and we wanted to see what we could do to stem that. So after a couple of years of fundraising and deliberating about what we can best do, we opened up our small overnight shelter. At the time it had 16 beds. That was 2016. Now we have about 24 beds, but on busy nights we'll have as many as 30 people at the shelter. We try not to turn anyone away.
Wow.
I've been in politics. My political career kind of mirrors my joining this organization. So I became a Bemidji City Council member in 2013, and then in 2016, after 4 years on the council, I got elected to the county board, where I served for 6 years. And then ran for House last cycle and lost, and so now I'm a civilian for the first time in over a decade, and it's weird. And so I'm trying to get back into
undo
office because it's where I'm comfortable. Getting yelled at by people. Nobody calls me up to complain anymore, and it's just kind of odd. But no, I'm really happy to be here, and it's kind of timely. I don't think that we did this on purpose, but the Supreme Court just made a major ruling in how cities deal with unsheltered people, and basically the Supreme Court said, yeah, they're illegal.
Yep.
We can outlaw homelessness in municipalities, which is mind-boggling.
Insane.
I mean, it's on par for our dystopian timeline that we're existing in right now. So
and it's kind of been that way. I mean, it's not uncommon to see police come and take people's tents and sleeping bags and throw them away and push them out and, put spiky things on park
Yeah.
benches so people can't sleep on them and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing to do, which is just, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but mind-boggling the amount of time and effort we will put on just keeping homeless people out of a certain area rather than just housing homeless people. But we'll get to that in a minute. So you said you own a restaurant in Bemidji, correct?
Yep. Yep. It's called the Wild Hare Bistro.
Okay.
HARE, like the rabbit.
Nice.
We opened that in 2005. We're open from 7:30 to 3, so it's kind of like a lunch counter sort of spot. We pride ourselves on buying from local farmers in the summertime. Well, whenever they're producing, we have some relationships with quite a few farmers and trying to grow that. And it's been fun to watch the capacity of the local farmers increase over the last 2 decades. There's just a lot more, and that's something that I kind of push for politically. Is that we'll always have corn, soy, and sugar beets in Minnesota, but maybe we could start growing broccoli and tomatoes as well, and feed ourselves and not rely on produce from Mexico, Arizona, and California, and start growing some small family farms again. So it's been fun to kind of be part of that, kind of on the vanguard in our community. And there's more and more restaurants now in our community that really do that, and customers love to see that you've got local produce and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, but a lot of fun.
That's really cool. My wife and I are super into the idea of homesteading. We own just a very
Yeah.
small, city lot right now. We're moving out to almost a half acre, and our plan is to basically, at least put aside a quarter acre or so to producing our
Yeah,
own.
you can grow a lot on a quarter acre.
Yeah, yeah, and we're really excited about it. It's one of the bigger reasons why we decided to kind of move out a little bit. But it's good to hear that. Well, we're not the only ones. I know we weren't, but
Well, I mean, I know I laugh when you say that you like the idea of homesteading, but you do a really good job. I mean, you grow way more than we don't grow anything. We've got 40 acres, so you're doing way more in your little city lot than we're doing. I'll go pick the wild asparagus and the raspberries and the stuff that grows by itself that I don't have to tend to. But,
yeah, that's true. Last year we got I think 8 gallons of tomatoes and like a couple winter squash, summer squash, and pumpkins, and that's about all that we grew that was actually edible, mind you. But we're working on it.
But
I
yeah,
grow sunflower stalks because the deer always get the flowers as soon as they bloom. I have like 3 hours of a bloom and then they're gone.
Right.
But then yeah, working on your homeless shelter and getting. I mean, it's one of those things, especially being in rural Minnesota. I'm from rural Minnesota, and we don't really equate homelessness with rural areas. You always think about it, people sleeping on a sidewalk in a big city, and so it's a thing that gets really ignored a lot of the time. And like when you said, 16 beds, and you've had to up it to 24, and sometimes you'll have as many as 30 people in there. That's even surprising to me, being in a rural area, that you still have that many people, who need shelter in those kinds of situations.
And we have a partner shelter in town that's a Lutheran, ELCA Lutheran kind of mission, I guess. It's a church, and they operate as a shelter as well. And so in the middle of the winter, we're each housing 25 people at each place. So Bemidji, if you look at Bemidji on the map, for those of you that aren't intimately familiar with rural Minnesota, it is pretty much smack in the middle of north central Minnesota. And we're in between 3 Native American reservations. And so we are kind of the regional hub. And like our Walmart, our Target are often like the top 5 grossing stores in the nation, because people drive to Bemidji from 100 miles away. And so if you're in a neighboring county and you're struggling with homelessness or mental health issues, we have the more capacity than a lot of our neighbors. And so people come to Bemidji to seek health care, to seek benefits. And so we kind of have to punch above our weight often. And though we are a town of 15,000, because of all the lake homes and the people that live outside of it kind of belies the true population. We're really a community of about 50 or 60,000, but the city itself only has 15,000 on the population side. But any given day, not including tourists, we have 45 to 50,000 people in town.
Wow.
So you'll see our criminal stats, like Bemidji is the has the highest rate of criminality in the state. And that's because, they say there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Nobody's committing crimes in the townships. They drive into Bemidji and get arrested for a DWI or getting
Right.
whatever the charges are. So it kind of pumps up our numbers more than what it would if we would be realistic about the size of our town.
Yeah.
Our crime stats would be cut in third.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
So we just have a lot of people coming through, and we have really high rates of poverty. Bemidji is the poorest city in the state. Beltrami County, we're the county seat of Beltrami. Beltrami is the second poorest county in the state, and so we just have a lot of poverty, a lot of challenges, lots of drug use, which I would remind everybody, we don't make drugs here in Bemidji. They get shipped in from outside, and so that's a challenge, is trying to stem that flow into our community. And so we have a lot of challenges, a lot of people living on the margins, and so then we end up, and plus, we just had a housing study done by our regional development commission, and they estimate that just the town of Bemidji, we need 1,000 more homes than we have to house everybody.
Wow.
And that's not to accommodate growth or anything, just to satisfy
the current
the
population.
need that we have.
Yeah.
Just with right now, yeah.
That is crazy.
And the same is true with daycare. We, like everywhere else in the country, we need more daycare, and so we just have a lot of challenges. Low tax base, lots of state land, so there's not a lot of taxable parcels. And I used to say, when I was on the county board, the severe problems that we face, we cannot levy our way out of. We need help from the state, and we need help from the feds to tackle these big problems that we have. I think the good news is that we are identifying the problems, at least, whereas before, like you said, nobody thinks that there's homelessness in rural Minnesota. It's a Minneapolis problem. It's a Portland problem, but we have a lot of homeless youth in Northwest Minnesota, and we have a lot of families that are just struggling and are doubled up, and sleeping in cars and vans and stuff, camping out in the summer. And a lot of that is the housing shortage. A lot of that is poverty, and the combination of the two.
Oh, I was just when you're talking about the homeless population just in Minnesota, and I kind of want to bring this to a more broad scale now, kind of start scaling this up in a conversation, because I was looking up some stats on homelessness for this, and I read there's about 650,000 homeless people in the United States nationwide. Does that sound about right? Because that's the population of Boston.
Yeah, or Wyoming, I think.
Yeah, it's huge. Like that's a huge number of people. Homelessness costs the U.S. Estimated around $30 billion a year in supportive services. The police that need to come and confiscate their tents and those kinds of things. And
what was the number?
About $30 billion a year.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, and
oh, go ahead.
What kind of the silver lining in that is, when a lot of times when we talk about what it'll take to, because a lot of this is a mental health crisis. At a certain time, we got rid of our big institutions, the big one flew over the cuckoo's nest sort of institutions, because we thought that they were inhumane, and we wanted to move to more neighborhood treatment, but we didn't fund it.
Well,
nationally, and so it was a great idea on paper, but it was fairly poorly executed.
I mean, I think it was executed exactly the way that they wanted. I mean, this was very much a Reagan era led policy, and I think it was executed exactly the way it was intended to be executed. It was a way to cut money from social services. And they used the guise of, these things are inhumane, which at the time, One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest was completely ridiculous connotation of what was going on in mental institutions at the time. You know,
Of
they
the
took
actual, yeah.
and certainly all of those things were rooted in truth at some point. We've had a very dark history with mental health as a species in general and as a country, and you know, definitely a lot of these things would have been prevalent in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But by the 70s and 80s, that was a completely unrealistic view of what mental health services looked like. But it was one of those kind of big popular culture catalysts that allowed certain people, Ronald Reagan, to start taking steps to cut the funding to those, to remove those services for the people who were most at risk. And that's what they did, and I think that was really, really the big thing. Before we get more into that, I just want to throw all these stats out so they're all on the board, and then we can kind of talk about the big thing. So 650,000 people on top of the $30 billion a year in supportive services. That's 650,000 people, again, a city the size of Boston or a state the size of Wyoming, that don't have any spending power to contribute to the economy. That's a huge hit in the GDP. Not to mention, you know, if you own a business in a tourist place and there's homeless people outside, obviously that's why a lot of people don't want these people here and want to make it illegal for them to be there, because that hurts their business. That obviously hurts economic function as well. So there's a lot of costs that are really hard to quantify that have very real impacts. And it would only cost from estimates 20 to 30 billion to completely end homelessness in the United States. It would be the same or cheaper than what we are currently spending in hard costs on homelessness, which is insane to me. That we go about it the hardest, most inefficient, and most inhumane way possible. And then we were talking about the largest causes of homelessness, addiction being a huge one. Cities report 68% of them report that's the biggest problem for homelessness. Obviously, that always pretty much ties into mental health. A lot of people self-medicate because they can't get mental health care. A lot of people can't get the addiction care they need because it is a genuine illness that needs, you know, genuine medical treatment. But then poverty, as we were talking about earlier, if you literally can't afford a house or there's no housing available to do that, that can be something that puts you in your car in a camper for a while. And then just healthcare, affordable healthcare in general. A lot of people go bankrupt because, you know, they get sick and they've got no other choice but to go to the doctor. And then bankruptcy, you end up losing your house, you end up losing, you know, getting bad credit. You can't get places to rent, you can't buy housing. And that ends up on the street as well. Excuse me. So that's kind of the biggest things.
And
God
sorry. Forbid you have a felony on your record.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, again, mental health issues. A lot of times you make poor decisions when you're not getting the mental health services you need, and that can lead to a felony, because that's really all it did was defunding the mental health services. Took everybody who was in mental health hospitals, institutions, in that, and transferred them into the justice system. And it just became a revolving door from the street to dealing with the police to going to jail or prison to back to the street. And it's tragic. And again, you know, there's enough conspiracy. Enough support for a conspiracy to say that this has sort of been lobbied by the privatized prison industry, at least in part. It doesn't hurt them in any way, shape, or form in that sense. So that can be a problem. But yeah, I just wanted to put all of those statistics out there because I think that it's a lot of things. Again, a big out of mind or out of sight, out of mind a thing, and you don't think about it being in rural places. But 650,000 people, that's got to be somewhere, and it's not all on the streets in Portland and Los Angeles. You know.
Right.
So,
and I would add on when you were talking about like the bouncing back and forth between between, you know, basically county jail and the streets. The third leg of that stool is the emergency room. You know, that's what I see. That's what happens in a lot of communities. So they're bouncing around, being on the streets, being in the emergency room, and being in jail.
Which is then driving healthcare costs up for everybody as well.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Which leads to more homeless people.
The largest provider of mental health care in the United States, I believe this is still true, is the LA County Jail. And I think that Chicago's county jail is the second largest, you know. And so when you talk about that $30 billion that we spend, I mean, that's a lot of meetings that I am in talking to people, and people just assume like, well, geez, we just can't afford to tackle this problem. And they're like, well, actually we can, because we are spending a ridiculous amount of money through really inefficient ways that aren't getting any positive results. And you can talk to any county sheriff, and they will tell you that the mental health issues are just causing huge problems. We're not able to deliver the care that they need. People can become dangerous and assault other inmates or guards, and nobody's getting the help that they need. And if you've got any kind of mental illness and you get thrown into a jail, they don't know how to work with you, perhaps, and so you end up in isolation. One of the worst things for your mental health is being isolated and stuck in a cinder block room.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think in some places we are starting to identify. I feel like that in my town in Bemidji, that the community sees the problem, and whatever the first step to help to correcting something is identifying that the problem exists, and start to find good solutions. But we've got a long ways to go. I mean, and as we were talking about the Supreme Court decision, it's just further allowing for the criminalization of homelessness, of poverty, and of mental health issues. There's a town about, I don't know, 60 miles to the west of Bemidji called Crookston. Sunday night, there was a officer involved shooting in a shelter. There was, from what I understand, there was a fight, an altercation between two shelter guests. Staff called police. Police came in, tried to use, they said, less lethal force that didn't work, so they shot him. And I don't know, I don't know the full story, so I don't want to. But this is not how we should be working with people that are struggling with mental illness, And I think of my little shelter where we have 25 people each night, and the harm that a situation like that would do to all of the people that are staying there, to have to witness that violent act, that is going to ripple through those poor people. And if they weren't dealing with enough trauma already, now they're going to have some serious trauma to work through. And it's not good for the cops. We have a great relationship with local law enforcement at our shelter, and they don't want to be in the business of mental health care. They're uniquely ill-suited to do it, or I shouldn't say uniquely, but they know that they don't have the training. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. So we are starting in many places around America to have mental health specialists accompany police on these sorts of mental health crisis calls, so that non-uniformed person can be the first contact and try to stabilize someone and bring someone down. And that's a good step, but we need to get mental health care out of the penal system.
Absolutely.
And I've never heard that conspiracy theory before about private prisons, but it kind of tracks.
I mean, and I don't
But
think it was in that sense a targeted like conspiracy in the they incorporated got together and was like, we should get rid of the mental health institutions to put them in. But you look at it, privatized prison again became really popular during the Reagan era. Really started to kind of get the wind in its sails there, and finding every avenue or just allowing things to happen rather than addressing them because they were beneficial in these types of situations. It makes sense. And we've seen this, with the war on drugs. There's obviously a lot of reasons that, marijuana was classified the way it was and still is in many places for so long. There were reasons that crack and cocaine are classified as different drugs when they're the same drug. Things like that. You see that all of this has been largely pushed by the prison industry that wants, beds to be full because that's how they make their money. So it would stand to reason that in the same sense, getting mentally ill people on the street where they're likely going to commit crimes and their only option is going to be, like you said, the ER or the penal system,
Right.
Like I said, I've got nothing to back it up aside from conjecture here at the moment, but I wouldn't be
It's a good hunch.
surprised.
Yeah.
So
Um,
I actually had,
Uh,
you go ahead, Reed.
oh, I was going to say real quickly, I have a friend I was having a disagreement with about whether or not felons should be allowed to vote, and he was saying, well, all they're going to do is vote to have less strict rules and less sentencing. I said, well, okay, if we're going to go that way, then if you have any investments in the private prison industry, then you also should not be able to vote because you're going to push for longer sentences
right.
and for more forced labor inside. We have inmates that are directly competing with union labor,
Mm-hmm.
in the manufacturing sector, in
For cents or dollars an
the
hour, yeah.
yeah, cents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
And for
And
privatized stuff, it's not even like it's they say like making license
right.
plates like it's for but no, they make the uniforms for McDonald's and like it's
Yeah,
privatized.
and I think they make motors for John Deere in some prisons. So I mean, it is directly competing with labor,
Mm-hmm.
and weakening labor, and it really needs to stop.
That's crazy. That's
But it
something that
makes
I
a lot
didn't
of
know.
people a
Yeah.
lot of money,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely. You had something to say?
Yeah, I was on the TikTok. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and came across Nick made a video about the Portland case in the Supreme Court,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it was more about Elon Musk and his bonus structure. And he brought up like a couple things that
Oh,
he
I
could
saw
pay
this
for,
one. Yep.
and homelessness is one of the ones that he talked about. And he said that he could, with Elon Musk, with the money that he was, in stocks, whatever, if he sold that in that value, he would be
Oh,
able to.
I saw one about Tesla and the bonus. Is that the one you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
Tesla
the
bonus for Elon Musk.
35 whatever the
56
bonus that he
billion.
just got, that $56 billion bonus, all the things that could have been paid for with that instead of just giving Elon more money for
Right. Yeah.
doing a mediocre job.
that he'll never be able to spend
Right.
Right. Yeah. No.
because it's just so much money. He's never going to be able to
Oh,
spend
yeah.
it all,
Well, I mean,
and
that's
he
just
doesn't pay any taxes either.
that's just why it's
Mm-hmm.
billionaires in general
No.
just shouldn't exist and whatever. But anyways, specifically for homeless, he said that he would have been able to pay for the average rent price for every homeless American, pay for their electricity, pay for their health care, and specifically mental health care, to visit a therapist like once a week for 4 years.
Everyone in the country.
Every single homeless person, house them, feed them, give them electricity and health
Get them their
care
care.
for 4 years. One
Yeah.
person, apparently.
There are some cities, some larger cities that have tried the housing first model as a city policy. Salt Lake City did this. I believe they're still doing it, but
Yeah.
I remember when they first did it because they did a study to estimate like what is the cost to us for each person on the street, and that's justice involvement, sitting in jail, sitting in the ER, working with social workers, where you just never get anywhere, for a variety of reasons because people have huge barriers to getting the care that they need. And if they housed a person, it would cost them about $15,000, maybe $20,000 a year, because it's about $1,000 a month for rent and then utilities. And then you can get people set up on their healthcare regimen, into treatment and stuff, but they really need to be stabilized in housing first. And so they realized that it was cheaper to pay their rent than to let them be on the streets, and I don't know how that program is going. I should follow up on that, but there are other cities that are doing that. And
Last I checked, because I've heard of that program, and it was going really well. Apparently, Salt Lake City had basically solved homelessness. There's no more homeless people on the street. I did hear that it was the church that was actually behind it, mostly because they didn't
Okay.
like the look of the homelessness.
Sure.
But hey, a church
Well-
putting its money where its mouth is for once. Not that I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
the Mormons or anything like that, but if they're going to do that, you think if all of the religious institutions in the country decided that this is what they were going to do and solve homelessness, then I might not be so mad about all the
Right.
taxes they don't pay.
Yeah, color me impressed.
Yeah.
Like I'll
Yeah.
be for religion. You right now you could say I'm probably against organized religion as a whole,
Right.
but if they start providing social services on a massive scale like that, I mean, yeah, color me convinced. They're
And I mean,
And
I still think that it's the government that's doing it, but the
well,
Mormon Church pretty much
sure.
controls,
Oh, sure,
Salt
sure.
Lake City government. They're pretty well.
but yeah, and that's what I was going to say. This is hardly like a bastion of liberal, politics and policies. This is a very conservative space that is identifying the a need and taking care of it. And I think in the long run, they're going to see that everybody is going to benefit from that. Like you were saying about having businesses having good access to their business for the public and not having panhandlers aggressively panhandling. You take care of that. You give people hope where they had despair, and and you see the happiness index rise. It's one thing that I often say when I'm politicking and especially in this arena is like, we know the answer to, we know the solutions. These are not elusive solutions. We know what things were like before we did things this way. And I think if I could drive one thing home to people, it's just the absolute importance on our lives of public policy, good and bad. We are here because of decades of bad policy towards mental health care, bad policy towards housing with like NIMBYism, and not, we have a system right now where the people that have homes get to decide whether or not the people that don't have homes get to have homes.
Right.
Through going and complaining at planning boards, when there's a building project about to come in to your community. And it doesn't matter if you're in a liberal community, a conservative community, people will come and say, this is a great idea and I support more housing, but my neighborhood it's just not a good fit here.
Yeah.
And that's just frustrating. Minnesota is doing things to say that I think they passed they didn't pass it, but they had a bill that would have said that we don't care what you think.
Yeah.
We don't care about the opinions of the neighborhood. We are going to look at the need, and if there's a need in a community for more housing, then we're going to greenlight the creation of more housing. And I know cities don't like that because they want to have control over their zoning, but at least in Minnesota, the control that they have was given to them by the state, and it can be equally taken away or
Right.
abridged by the state.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on zoning,
Yep.
and basically, I think what we came up with was like we're good with no zoning,
Yeah.
no zoning whatsoever, essentially.
I mean, I think obviously there's some zoning that's probably good for
residential, zero
yeah,
residential limits for zoning.
Yeah. Obviously like building
Yeah, on
codes and stuff
density
like
and things
yeah.
like
Right. Yeah.
There, the townships that buffer, so Bemidji again is 15,000 people. We have 4 townships that surround Bemidji, and they each have between 2,000 and 4,000 residents. So some of our townships are as big as small cities, and they have near zero zoning in a couple of them. And I've often encouraged them to look into zoning, and I'm lucky that I haven't been tarred and feathered yet for bringing it up. But they have huge problems because you'll get developments that kind of run amok, and there's no oversight to make sure that the streets and roads that are being built to get people to these developments are built to a standard. Sometimes you'll have industry like a gravel pit or something like that, or a cement
Yeah.
making plant open up right next to a residential area, and so it really diminishes the quality of life. But because they have no zoning, they can't stop them. So there's a happy medium to be found. We need to guide growth, but we also need to accommodate the growth. And
Yeah.
so I was on the planning board in Bemidji, and before I was elected, I was on the planning commission. So I'm a little bit biased about the importance of centralized zoning, but we also have to make sure that we're not just letting the loudest and most powerful people in a community decide what's going to happen.
And the problem with centralized zoning is that it's very easily weaponized by, people who may not have the best interest of certain people at heart. Obviously a lot of zoning was specifically designed to be racist, to segregate communities, even post-segregation and things like that. And it's finding ways to make sure that doesn't happen. I think the biggest zoning or zoning practice that should be removed is just single family home zoning, like requiring single family residential houses that don't allow townhouses or duplexes or quadplexes and that sort of thing, has really exacerbated the housing shortage problem, has really, made it more difficult to build affordable housing, for people to find affordable housing. And I think doing something along those lines, getting rid of that, would be a big step forward. But you're absolutely right. We can't just let everybody run willy nilly. But it is important that you don't get rich racist assholes in a place and are like, I just don't want the brown people here, so I'm going to zone it in a way that
Right.
makes it really inconvenient for them.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, in Bemidji we are about 20%. I think the census I think says like 12% Native, but I think that's a huge undercount. And if you include people that identify as being mixed, like two races or more,
Right.
then we are looking at more like 25% of our community is Native, and there's definitely issues. 20 years ago, the ACLU called Bemidji the Burlingame of the North. Um,
Birmingham.
and it was a very well earned. I know people get mad when I bring that up and say that it's not fair and I shouldn't say that, but it's very true, and it's important that we know our history so that we can, improve and look back and say, okay, these are things that practices we don't agree with, but we definitely have a lot of issues with discrimination. But again, when you have a 1% rental vacancy, which is about what we have in our town, the landlords can be very choosy as to who they rent to. They also don't have to keep up their units because they know that for every 100 people that need a bedroom, there's 97 bedrooms. So I am going to rent out my unit, whether it's the nicest one in town or the biggest pit, because people need to live somewhere and it gets cold here in the winter and there's a lot of mosquitoes in the summer and people don't want to be outdoors, at night. And I don't know where I was going with that, but that is a big issue,
Right. No,
and it plays on some of the historic racism in our community.
Your Birmingham of the North comment reminded me, actually, kind of what kicked off our idea to do the zoning episode was a documentary called The Jim Crow of the North, and it was about zoning in the Twin Cities and how it was, housing covenants, which were basically racial HOA type things, like you will not sell this to a person of X race ever if you buy this house. That was a real thing that happened up here that, like, we didn't know about prior to that. We like to pat ourselves on the back for being an inclusive northern state that would never do any of the racisms, but we have some dark history, and obviously we've had some pretty rough history with law enforcement and racial issues as well. And so it's one of those things that requires inner reflection, even when you're in the middle of it, and it's hard to see when you're this close to it. But
Right.
I mean, I think it just mainly comes down to just the ahistorical nature of our education. So even
for sure.
for Minnesotans who believe that we have a pretty good public schooling system across the country, certainly not the best, but even specific to Minnesota, history, we're ignorant. And so I don't know how you fix that necessarily, but I feel like understanding comes through learning certainly our past.
Absolutely. I mean, we're trying to help fix it, one drunken conversation at a time.
That's right. That's right.
But I think a lot of the issues with homelessness too, and changing people's perception so we can implement some of these things is stigmas. There's a ton of stigmas
Yeah.
around homelessness. And
Could I talk a
yeah,
little bit to
absolutely,
that
absolutely.
specifically? Yeah, one thing that I try to do when I go and talk to, I don't know, a church group or a civic organization or something, or if I'm on the radio or on a podcast, I think it's a lot of people, and I think this is a product of when you see that there's this big problem that seems impossible to tackle. Defense mechanisms kick in, and if I can say this is not a policy issue, this is a lazy people or people that made bad decisions. That's why there's homelessness. And if people would just buck up and get a job or whatever they come up with, then they say, okay, now this isn't a problem for me to deal with. It's not a problem for my
It's
community.
a them problem. It's not a
just
me
these
problem.
isolated people. But of our day center, now we've got a really nice weather today, so hardly anyone is here. People pop in to get some food or maybe take a shower or something. But in the springtime, we were seeing over 60 people some days, somewhere between
Wow.
40 and 60 people a day. Um, Most of the people had, a lot of the people had substandard housing, so maybe they had housing somewhere, but they didn't have functioning water, or they couldn't wash their clothes or take a shower or something like that, or they don't have heat, or they don't have AC. Um, and they'll come here on hot days if they don't have AC. They come here on cold days if they don't have heat.
Mm-hmm.
Of the people that are able to work that aren't ill, we have a really high work participation rate. I know several people that have two jobs that work more than 40 hours a week. But because of a felony on their record, bad credit history, bad rental history, other things like that, they have high barriers to finding housing. But it's not because they're not industrious,
Right.
and more we are seeing an aging homeless population with more and more mental illness, and not drug use, not alcoholism, though that is there.
Mm-hmm.
Right now at our shelter, we see every day probably 6 or 7 people that are here because of schizophrenia. No other reason. They're good people. They're kind people. They have loving families that worry about them and have tried to get them the help that they need. But one big part of unmedicated schizophrenia is really low trust and paranoia,
Yep.
and so people end up not trusting their families, not trusting the police. They don't want to go into the county building to get services, but they end up trusting us. And so they stay with us because they feel safe. They feel that they have some dignity. And that is the big thing that I am thinking of right now is, how do we house this population that really should not, well, I always say nobody should be with us,
Right.
but everybody deserves to have a better situation than what we
Mm-hmm.
can provide, but this group especially, I just worry about and wish that we could figure out a way to get them into some kind of housing. But our love affair of bureaucracy in this country really is probably the biggest barrier, because of all the means testing that has to happen and all the forms that need to be filled out. Something that I find really I don't know, humorous. It'd be funny if it wasn't true, sort of thing, is having to take an 80-year-old Native person to the Social Security office to get his Social Security card so he can prove that he's a U.S. citizen. His family has been living here for literally 15,000 or 20,000 years, and we have to prove that he's from Panema on the Red Lake Reservation or whatever. I really have come to despise means testing,
Yeah.
and really wish that we could just rapidly get people the help that they need. Another problem, if I can go on
Yeah.
a little bit away from that, is we will get someone, say they're using opioids,
Mm-hmm.
and this happens quite often, where someone will come and say, "Hey, I am just so tired of this lifestyle. I'm sick of being a slave to opioids, and I really want to get clean. Can you help me get into a treatment program? I haven't used for a day and a half, and so I've got another day or so before my skin's going to start crawling.
Mm-hmm.
Can you help me get in?" And so then we'll try, and if we can't get someone in, then it kind of reaffirms their notions that nobody cares about them. And even
Right.
when I try, why should I even
Mm-hmm.
bother trying? Because whenever I do, I still just get slapped in the face. And there was one young man about a year ago came to me, and we got so close to getting him into a treatment. They had a bed. It was it was about 5 miles away. Does he have insurance? Yes, he's got MA, medical assistance. Super.
Mm-hmm.
Send that over. So we sent over the information. Oh, he's got MA out of North Dakota, not Minnesota. We don't accept North Dakota MA. So then he wasn't able to get in. And he was ready. He was there. Someone close to him had just died, and he didn't want to follow them. And now I haven't seen that person since. And they were just really dismayed, and it took the wind out of their sails. And then they left. And I worry about this young man. I don't know where he is. I hope he's still alive. But that's the frustration, is not being able to attack.
Mm-hmm.
When the opportunity is there. I'm not really sure always what the answer is, but I wish that we could get away from this, like the whole moral hazard thing and the need to mean test, and God forbid we should accidentally help someone that is living in poverty.
I I think that, and this is something that obviously transcends just homelessness. We see this with immigration. We see this with minimum wage. We see this with, anything. Single moms. No matter what situation, when you get to anytime somebody might need a little bit of help because society has failed them, it's like, well, do they really deserve the help? We need to make sure that they really deserve this help before we give them this help. And then even then, maybe we still shouldn't give it to them. And so a lot of these stigmas really do kind of overarch. And I think one of the ways, that is a good way of debunking these stigmas and helping people come around on it is just explaining the stigmas and explaining, why they're not true and what the reality of them is. And we try to tackle those kinds of things a lot. And I think we've got a really good opportunity here. So I actually wrote some down that I just kind of wanted to go through, and we can talk about them, and hopefully the people who listen to this can take something away, and when they hear them, they can hopefully help break them. One of them being that, a lot of beggars are rich. They'll put on their raggedy clothes and go stand on the street corner because you can make all kinds of money, and then walk around the corner and get in their Mercedes and drive away. And
Right.
that to me is just insane. I don't know if you have any statistics or opinions on that one, but
I know a lot of, when I drive around my smaller town, and I see people. It's funny, they don't call it panhandling, they call it signing, because they've got the little cardboard sign that says anything helps or whatever. They don't make a whole lot of money. If they stand out for several hours, they will receive a lot of insults and maybe $20, after, because people are giving out, if people are giving, they're giving $1.
a couple bucks at a time.
I think
almost.
before the pod started, before we started recording, we were kind of talking about, do you give money? And I would tell people, feel free to give people money if you want to. Don't have any expectations that it's going to lead them out of homelessness, but it might
Right.
get them a sandwich or a bottle if they're, and some people are very hardcore alcoholics, and when they're jonesing, it can be deadly.
Yeah.
So helping someone get alcohol is not necessarily a bad thing, but do it at your own. I don't
Right.
advocate for people to hand out money to panhandlers, but don't beat yourself up if you do.
Right.
It's okay to do something nice for someone. I do suspect, because I see panhandlers here that I don't recognize, and I do sometimes suspect that some people might be trafficked to, and I have no way to prove this, but anecdotally, I do know that some people that are seen panhandling at the Walmart in Bemidji have also been seen panhandling in Brainerd. And if you own a vehicle, you really aren't.
Right,
You've
right.
graduated out of the need to panhandle. So I wonder what's going on there. But most people that are panhandling are really at the bottom of the social strata, and they have zero money, and they need that to buy food.
Well, and there's
it's not.
there's like different like levels of homelessness, right? So like if you're at a level where you have a vehicle or other means to transport, then you're you're homeless, but you have
You have
know,
some form of
home
shelter.
insecure, I guess you
Yeah.
would say,
Right.
right?
And mobility.
Yeah, and mobility. So like if you have that, then you probably are going to be able to find better ways to make money than by standing on the road. So I mean, on the face of it,
Right.
like logically, it just doesn't
Make a whole lot of
track.
sense.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we talked about, they're homeless because they choose to be. That was kind of the one that we were just going over. They're lazy. They choose to be addicted to things like drug use is a choice, and that sort of thing.
Right. I don't like it. I hear a lot of people say that people choose to be homeless. If you see substance use disorder as a mental illness, which it is, people do not have informed consent. They are not making a rational decision. I know that sometimes people think like, okay, if I can get, like, I know someone that is elderly and really should be in an assisted living facility of some sort. He also drinks a lot, and he doesn't want to go into housing because they're not going to let him drink.
Right.
So is he choosing to be homeless, or is he a debilitated alcoholic that needs commitment
Right.
to help, get cleaned up? I don't think that, even though he refuses to accept housing, to say that he is making an informed choice, I think is disingenuous. And again, it lets us off the hook. It lets the community off the hook of trying to help the person.
Right. It's shoving community responsibility back on to the individual. But even beyond that, like, oh, why don't you get a job? I've seen the joke many times among more conservative or unenlightened people of handing out job applications to people begging on the streets or panhandling, and it's like you need an address for for employment. Usually, there's a lot of things. You genuinely need clothes that are clean. You need to be shaved and showered, and these are a lot of things, resources
Right.
that these people don't have, even if they did want to get a job. And then, like you said, many of them do work, as they do, minimum wage people. Many minimum wage people work full time, but they don't have, they still don't have access to housing, and that's that's something that just it drives me nuts, because you're making an assumption about somebody's situation that is almost certainly untrue, patently across the board. And sure, many of them have made poor decisions in their life, but all of us have made bad decisions in our life, and we're all, one bad decision or one mistake away from being homeless ourselves. We are all, if we didn't have the right support systems or the right privilege or luck or whatever situation, we could be that person. And it's just insane, the arrogance that some people look upon that in. But it's really true that there's no way for a person to get out of homelessness without societal structure and help there to get them there.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and something I often will say, if you go to a fast food restaurant in my city, any of them, there's a 90% chance that someone working on your food is unhoused. But they're working. They're working 10-hour days. I know people with 2 jobs, and then we have other people that are very frail. And we've decided as a society that if you're over 65, you shouldn't have to work. Or if you're in your 70s or 80s, for God's sakes. If you've got severe mental illness, we've got people with physical disabilities that are with us. I mean, these are good people that have just had a rotten string of luck a lot of times, and it's not really even their fault that they are where they're at. You get sick. We don't throw people with kidney cancer out on the streets and blame them for having cancer. And well, yeah. Maybe some hospitals do. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. Sometimes you laugh so you don't cry, right?
Yeah, seen the American healthcare system.
Yeah, to call it a healthcare system is kind of like an oxymoron, right? I mean, it's bare or a euphemism anyways. One thing that we get to see here really is where we see people that are slipping through the cracks that can't seem to get care. And I know plenty of people in my community that have jobs that come from upper middle class backgrounds, that struggle with mental health, and they can't get care. So you take someone from wealth and privilege, and they're not able to get the care that they need.
Right.
What are the rest of us to do? How are we supposed to get anything if the uber privileged aren't able to get it? So it's just. We really need to reinvest in rural health care. I think we need to incent people from rural backgrounds to go to school and become doctors and psychiatrists and nurses. And I will say quickly that I see wonderful people in our healthcare system, wonderful people in our law enforcement, trying to do the best job that they can, but the system, such as it is, prevents good people from doing the good work that they want to do. And so everybody's frustrated. Everybody hates the system.
And
everybody knows that it doesn't work.
Yeah,
but then there are people that do benefit from it, that have a lot more sway over our politicians at the federal level than the people that are suffering. And so then we are stuck in this status quo that everyone hates.
Yeah, I sort of semi-jokingly call our economic system, the way that we run the United States, as an orphan crushing machine. Because it just feels like that's the purpose of our systems, is to make sure that there's people being crushed.
I like the term late stage capitalism, but capitalism has a way of hanging on. So I think late stage capitalism can pretty much self-perpetuate.
Yeah, it's not late stage capitalism. It's just, well, I suppose it's not really, it's falling out of being capitalism and turning more into plutocracy, I guess.
Crony capitalism.
Right. We're changing economic systems at this point.
I don't know. I think there's no such thing as crony capitalism. That the crony part is just an end state of capitalism without regulation. And so, therefore, if there was no regulations, we'd still have crony capitalism. It's just that we
Yeah.
choose to hopefully rein in portions and ways so that capitalism works. So I don't like
I
to
mean, isn't
differentiate the two.
the inevitable conclusion or end result of unmitigated, unfettered capitalism is one corporation that rules them all,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. That's the end state.
We're not quite there yet.
But we're
We got
about
6
as close as we
corporations
can
that
be
rule them
without
all.
just ceasing to function, even at the way that we are functioning today, which I think most Americans would agree is not optimal.
No,
If
it's-
only we had antitrust laws.
Yeah, if only. Hey, hats off to one thing that Biden's done pretty decently well is his organization has at least tried to do some more antitrust stuff.
Yep.
Certainly more so than Trump did, and I don't really know about.
I mean,
Obama.
Let's hear it for Khan.
we haven't done antitrust stuff since basically Nixon, and then Reagan really started gutting the system. So I mean, we're making progress slowly but
Give
surely.
Clinton a little bit of credit there too. He helped move things along.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, didn't he sign what did he sign? It wasn't the Glass-Steagall, obviously. That was, I think.
He further deregulated banks,
Yeah.
allowing them to spread out, horizontally and
Yeah,
vertically
the investment
and get into,
and commercial, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
use our deposits for risky investments and stuff like that.
Yeah, but nobody's perfect, obviously.
We're starting to hopefully move back in the way that it goes to Teddy.
Yeah.
Teddy is where we really need to get back to when it comes to antitrust enforcement.
Well, and Biden brought us, we I think that the Biden administration has done a horrible job of celebrating its victories, but we have a lot of things that we should be really thankful for. A lot of really good bills got passed.
No, truthfully.
And I mean, I don't think that Biden himself is the most progressive person in the world, but his administration is the most progressive administration since FDR, hands down. We've done more for the climate.
Okay, I was just curious on this specifically, how you define that as being the most progressive since FDR.
Yeah, you look at Nina Khan that is cracking down on antitrust. You look at the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a funny name for something that really was one of the biggest environmental programs in the history of the world. Mm-hmm. You look at the CHIPS Act, that's going to bring production back to the U.S. Of high-tech manufacturing. There are others that I'm not thinking of, but there's a lot of things that we got done. His response to COVID, injecting a lot of money into the economy, selling. I remember 2 years ago he got into a lot of hot water because he was selling our petroleum reserves to the Chinese, and we're looking at energy independence. And here he is, but then he was able to buy it back because by selling it all off, it brought the price down. A gallon of gas dropped, I think, 40 cents a gallon because of what he did, and then he was able to buy it back on kind of pennies on the dollar. So the government ended up making, what was it, $180 billion on that sale. So there's a lot of things that they did. They were very reactive, very to really smooth out a lot of things. I mean, you look at our inflation versus inflation everywhere else on the planet, and 3%, 6% sounds awfully high, but it's nothing like a lot of modern industrial countries that have 20, 30% inflation, so we've been doing pretty good. We're just not, and then we have OAN and Fox News telling us how horrible everything is. And people love to hear that things are awful. It for whatever reason, it just hits them in the lizard brain really hard, and that's what then they hang on to. And so we've got a lot to celebrate, but there's a lot of people mourning the decline of America, even though we're kind of doing pretty darn good.
I do think, I mean, you've made a solid argument for being, one of the most progressive since FDR. I think definitely the
NLRB. Don't forget about the NLRB rulings and with the union ruling and just like So there's a lot with the NLRB that you got to give Biden a ton credit for.
No, there is a lot, and they've done a horrible, which this is just a Democrat problem in general, done a horrible job of
Branding,
selling their victories
yeah.
and letting people know, just
Right.
advertising their victories. But it's one of those things to start going back and looking at Eisenhower and his work with the interstate system and desegregation, and obviously being a Republican and still probably one of the more liberal Republicans of the 20th century. And LBJ, as much as I'm not a huge fan of him, but the Civil Rights Act and stuff, it gets hard when you start saying the most progressive in all of this time, especially since we've had some pretty regressive things that aren't necessarily the Biden administration's fault, with obviously overturning Roe and getting rid of affirmative action, but like we're living in a pretty regressive era at the moment as well in a lot of times, so it gets hard to reconcile. Is it so progressive? And in a lot of ways, you're absolutely right, it is. And we need to be reminded of that.
Right. It's always a mixed bag, right? I mean, even Nixon did some pretty progressive things.
Yeah,
The
EPA,
Endangered
baby.
Species Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
He was just a paranoid, crazy man. Also,
I think Nixon gets a worse rap than he's due. I mean, he definitely deserves a lot of criticism because there was a lot of shit that he did, that was very bad. But people forget that there was a lot of stuff he did that was really good. One of the other. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the Nixon is the New England Patriots of presidential politics. I mean, he was due to win in a landslide. It was the last time that Minnesota voted for a Republican,
Yep.
right? I mean, that's how well he did, and he was going to do that well without cheating. Just like the New England Patriots. They're one of the best teams, probably the best football team to ever exist, and they still insisted on cheating. It was like, just take the clean win. You don't
Allegedly.
need to cheat. You're way better than these other guys. Whatever.
One of the ones that I also wanted to point out before we kind of moved on, because I want to give you some time to talk about your campaign and stuff like that, was blue cities have more homelessness, and a lot of times people will be like, well, look, obviously blue policies, progressive policies contribute to homelessness, not eradicate it. And I think that it's one of those things that obviously people are moving to places where they have resources to survive, to live, and a lot of conservative states don't allocate any resources for that. There's very little in the way of homeless shelters, or very little in the way of healthcare resources, mental health resources. And so, when they say that they're literally busing homeless people to places like California and Portland, that's why, is because they're places that at least go a little bit out of their way to help take care of these people, and they're coming from places that are just out of sight, out of mind. Obviously, we don't have a homelessness problem because we've gotten rid of all the homeless people by sending them to the places that will care for them. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, but
Yeah, I'll pick on some of my neighbors. We are if you look at an election map, Bemidji is a blue dot in a sea of red, and but we know that because we see the vans, we'll see county branded vans come to our shelter, drop people off, and then leave, and then we'll call to that county to talk about the person that they dropped off at our shelter, and they'll say, oh, well, we closed their case. And sometimes they close their case the day that they bring them to us. So they are literally, well, not literally washing their hands, but figuratively washing their hands of these people, bringing them to us, ghosting them, cutting them off from their families, cutting them off from, if there's justice involved, cutting them off from their attorneys, their legal counsel, and making it impossible for them to go to court in these other counties. And so, yeah, there's less homeless people in those counties surrounding us because they end up here. So it's not our I mean, it borders on the whole, like, if you build it, they will come. But we're a larger community. We have more capacity to help people, and so then they end up here. But it's not our policies that are driving up homelessness. You could argue that it's the policies of those other counties, or like you're talking about, the red states that have really poisonous policies towards poverty, that are forcing that relocation.
I think that
And I
that's.
don't know how to fix that.
No, well, I mean, Again, breaking the stigma, because a lot of these places are allowed to have these policies because of this is the stigma
Mhm.
that it comes out. Oh, I went to Portland. There's a bunch of homeless people. Obviously, these blue cities and these blue states don't know how to handle the problem. But I can go walk around bumfuck
Right.
Texas and I don't see any homeless people. Well,
Right.
and this is why. It's like, yeah, because it's a
And
very
how
inhumane
many of those?
environment.
Yeah, how many of those people in tech in Portland have an Idaho ID?
Right, exactly, and that's where I think people really need to start understanding this as a nationwide problem and stop looking at like a blue city situation or
Right.
red city situation. Like everybody moves to where they are going to hopefully be able to survive the best way that they can.
To thrive. Right.
Uh-huh. And unfortunately for homeless people, that's just finding a place that will put a shelter, a roof over their head for a night when they need it, or allow them to get health care that they need. And it's just crazy to me when you say that they're literally busing people to your homeless shelter from surrounding counties
Right.
and dropping them off in the way that an unwanted baby would be dropped off at the firehouse or something.
At the fire hall. Right.
It's just crazy to
Yeah. Well,
me.
and I think that the maybe the last thing I'll say here on this is, you know, policy towards marginalized people is kind of a canary in the coal mine, and we know the health of our society by how we treat the least of ours. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're allowing ourselves to treat marginalized people, vulnerable people so cruelly, it's just a matter of time before, it's that whole, like, they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist,
Mm-hmm.
and then they came for me and there was nobody left to, we are watching really bad policy be implemented that is really disaffecting people. And then this is all an economic development thing too. If I really feel, if we need to do, I always say we, and now I'm gonna segue maybe into my politics.
Yeah.
Minnesota needs a new Minnesota miracle, and maybe the whole nation does. Maybe a
Mm-hmm.
new deal, a new deal, where we are investing in infrastructure, investing in building the housing that we need, even if we're running up some debt to do that, because that's
Mm-hmm.
going to create construction jobs, and there's going to be that virtuous circle that we're always looking for in economics, where the building of the homes will instigate a creation of jobs, which will then have uh, uh, um, I'm trying to think of the, then, by having a lot of people then working in construction, that's going to allow them to go shopping and go to restaurants. And so that's going to grow more restaurants and retail. And it's just that big virtuous circle. So by tackling this, what looks like an insurmountable issue, I mean, it took World War II to have the 50s,
Right.
the boom of the
Mm-hmm.
50s, so this is what Homer Simpson would call a crisopportunity, a crisis and a great
Uh-huh.
opportunity to be able to really put some juice into our economy, get people working that aren't working, grow our economy, and have higher wages and happier people, and have everybody housed,
Well, and we
have more
have
nurses, have more psychiatrists,
Yeah, we have the historical data too that investment in infrastructure and investment in people, education, healthcare, roads and bridges, all of these things is an investment. It's not a debt. It's not who's going to pay for it. It pays for itself. It has always paid for
Right.
itself and paid
Yep.
dividends everywhere. You look at the interstate system, the most massive infrastructure undertaking in probably human history, and
Probably. Mhm.
you look at the economic benefits of that. You look at that was instrumental to the GDP growth and the growth of this nation, and we literally couldn't function as a country without it. And so yeah, it
Mhm.
cost a lot of money to build, but it has made us far more money than it ever cost in the long run, even to
Yeah.
maintain. And that's the same. You invest in education and you make sure that people know how to do the jobs that pay a little bit better, and we can lead the world. And again, people buy stuff from us globally, and all these kinds of things. And that's the same with homeless people and housing and all of
Mhm.
that. You build houses, you build infrastructure, you give people that ability to pay back on those investments, and they always do.
Yeah, and you look at, again, just to bring up the Minnesota Miracle from the early 70s. That was spearheaded by Wendell Anderson, a Democratic governor, but
Hmm.
working with the Republican legislators to pass all of these policies that invested in education, invested in housing, invested in roads and bridges. Um, and that did us really well until it was largely undone in the Palenti
Mm-hmm.
administration in the aughts. And this is one of my favorite anecdotes, and I should find the clip if I can find it or the quote. But Palenti, who was our governor from 2002 to 2010, he got an undergrad degree from the University of Minnesota in the 70s, and then he went on to get a law degree from the University of Minnesota. His father was an assembly line worker at the Ford Ranger plant.
Mm-hmm.
Strong union man, strong Democrat. Law school got to Palenti, and he became a Republican. And or whatever he did. I don't know how he became a Republican. He was just lashing out at his union pop, I guess. But in
Fell and hit
his
his head
first term, I
sometime.
think. Sorry,
Fell and hit his head at some point.
is at some point yes. So he was giving a press conference, and in the before time, like when I went to school, Minnesota paid for about 2/3 of the cost of post-secondary education,
Mm-hmm.
and the student paid for about a third. It's now flipped to where a student is paying for 2/3 and the state is paying for 1/3. And Plenty said in a press conference, affordable post-secondary education is not a right in Minnesota. Well, it was when you were there. It was when you needed it. You got out of law school with no debt.
Mm-hmm.
Not because your parents were wealthy, but because Minnesota valued paying for education, because an educated workforce is what made Minnesota the great state that it is, why we have more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other state. That is a product of the Minnesota miracle. And now that they've got theirs, they're trying to pull the ladder up behind them and dismantle the social state that we created. And we need to rebuild that again. And like you said, we know that when we make those investments, they pay back tenfold down the road. And it's an easy sell. And again, I'll say we know what to do. So we look
We
at
have the
northern
technology.
Minnesota. Back 20 years ago, northern Minnesota was a solid Democratic stronghold.
Mm-hmm.
The range was Democratic. Where I live was Democratic. The farmers to the northwest were Democrats. And now it's flipped. Everybody's Republican. And
Mm-hmm.
I really feel that if we can start delivering to people, we can start turning that tide. I feel like my campaign is the tip of the spear going into north central Minnesota. I can get elected this cycle, start doing good things, bringing back deliverables, showing people that we are able to positively change their material condition, and they'll see that we are not just carpetbaggers that are saying whatever we think they want to hear, but we're actually going to do real stuff that really impact our communities, and then hopefully we can get people back to voting for us. Because right now in my town, we have a lot of Democrats. I have a lot of support, but half of the people that support me don't vote. And so I can't
Yeah.
win because, I have more yard signs than anyone last cycle. If yard signs voted, I would have won in a landslide. But because we had 45% turnout amongst Democrats in the district and 80% amongst Republicans, even though there's more of us,
You know,
we didn't turn out to vote. And so then we don't win.
and that's a
And,
that's a
and hopefully
perennial
we're changing
Democrat,
that this
you
cycle.
know, perennial Democrat
Yes.
problem
Yep.
there. Yeah,
Yep.
hopefully we're changing.
Yep.
So it's at least it's safe to say that you support the more progressive of policies going into the state house if you were to be elected.
Yep, yeah, I'm union endorsed. I want to push for more housing, better rules to protect renters, better rules to protect the ability to organize. Yeah, I am a very progressive candidate
Oh.
that wants to accomplish stuff for the good people of Minnesota.
Yeah, and I was just pulling up some of your specific election stuff here, and it looks like last cycle you were actually pretty darn close, 45% to 54%, which is that's a really
Well, I
really
mean,
I lost
solid.
your audio.
oh, can you hear us or not? Hello?
Can you hear us now? Let's try this again.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
We're messing with it. We can hear you though.
Yeah.
How about now?
Can you hear us now?
No.
Hmm.
Happened? What happened? It's not letting me change it.
Roadcaster.
Here, let me just unplug and plug it back in.
Yeah, plugged back in again. All right, can you hear us now? No?
Testing 1, 2.
Taylor audio, can you hear us yet?
The
Yes,
mics
no.
are picking up.
Our mics are picking up. I don't know what the problem is.
Come on. Just select the microphone, refresh the page. Let's try this. And jump back in.
All right. Maybe.
Yeah. This might be part of the problem.
Oh, man. Can everybody on the live still hear us? Anybody on the live listening, can you hear us, or is our total okay? So they can hear us on the
There it
live.
is.
Okay, now you can hear us.
Hey.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry for some technical difficulties. Whatever makes it through into the final
Nope.
edit there.
There's a box that says Taylor Audio,
Mm-hmm.
and then all of a sudden that box disappeared, and then I couldn't hear you guys anymore.
Weird. Yep, that sounds about right. Here, let's just do a quick clap before we begin again.
I don't know if that picked up or not.
All right, nothing like some
Canvas.
audio issues to just keep us right on track.
But yeah, so you were okay. Go ahead. Yeah, you were only 10%.
Yeah, we were just saying that we had a really competitive race last cycle in 2022, and we interview a lot of people, and not everybody has something that's within roughly 10 points of the candidate.
8.5.
Yeah.
8.5. There you go.
And it's what 1,200-ish votes basically that you.
Yeah.
So that's not insurmountable odds. I mean, and I'm assuming you're doing a lot of door knocking and.
Yep. Well, and it'll be interesting to see how this because this is a new district, right? After that last cycle was the first election after the redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to be a seat that is going to be held by the Democrats in presidential election years and by the Republicans in midterm? Or can we sustain a turnout amongst Democrats election cycle after election cycle, regardless of the top of the ticket? And that's really where I'm hoping that we can get to. And we can only do that by really energizing not the Democratic base, but the base of workers in the district, and getting people in Red Lake to really see that there are politicians that want to do meaningful work for the tribes, that believe in tribal sovereignty, that believe in improving, again, the material condition of people on the tribal reservations. And once we can gain that trust and get people excited again, America's never had a labor party. The people on top have done a great job of dividing workers and make us. It's that, like, have you seen that political comic where there's a tycoon that has a big plate of cookies, and there's a construction worker with one cookie and an immigrant with no cookies, and the tycoon says, "Hey, that immigrant wants your cookie."
Yep.
They've been just doing a great job of exacerbating xenophobia and racism to keep us from being able to collectively work to have our say in the democratic process. So I'm hoping we can undo that here in Bemidji, at least in our little district of 44,000 people, and start making real changes to really improve people's lives. And I think we can do it.
I think that especially now that I've been talking to more people running for state houses and stuff like that, I think that there's more potential, because the lower down you get on the ticket, the less that party politics matters. You're voting for somebody you're voting for somebody who understands your community and the issues that are important to that community, and you have the ability to knock on somebody's door, shake their hand, and be like, hey, I know that healthcare access, mental health access, these kinds of things in this community are something that we need to focus on right now, and here's the plan that I want to put forward to, and those sorts of things. So I think that it's incredible work that you're doing, and I absolutely think that that's the since you apparently enjoy not being a civilian and putting in the effort to doing this kind of stuff, it's good to have people like that are willing to do that. I know you had a few questions about his campaign there.
It's
I
good
didn't
to
know
be
if
busy.
Yeah, I just, trolled your website a little bit and took some of the main points that you had listed on there and just kind of wanted to have you give just a couple minutes of just expanding upon some of those issues. One of the main ones being fighting for small businesses. Just kind of wanted to see, what does that mean for you? Like, do you see some serious obstacles currently in place, or there's just some things that you would do to prop some businesses up to really help them out?
As cost of living is increasing, people need to make higher wages. And I'll pick on my own business. We have about 7 employees. We don't have real high annual sales. We're a very small business, and as we, I really believe in a minimum wage. That, I mean, really a living wage in my community is about $20 an hour, not the 15 that we've been calling for years. That's not enough anymore.
It hasn't been enough for a while.
But
It was barely enough when we started calling for it a decade ago.
To some, right, yeah. But to jump up to $20 an hour right away could be ruinous for a lot of small businesses, and small businesses are the #1 employer in Minnesota. I think especially greater Minnesota. So how do we achieve that? How do we get wages up without crushing the jobs? I think that through the tax regime, there's certain things that we can do to help with that. I think one of the big things that we can do is move to single payer health care and remove that from both the employer's costs and the costs of all the copays and premiums on the employee. You take the cost of health care away, now you're going to realize a 25% gain in your purchasing power or something, because you're not spending money on all those copays, on all those premiums.
Well, I even say even
that
if
maybe
you,
is a little bit of an exaggeration.
even if you even if you just move that cost to a single payer, your current healthcare costs to a single payer program, then you're just getting rid of all the stress of having to manage your own healthcare.
And that too, yes,
care.
absolutely.
If that's all you end up with, like, count me in. Like having to search around for which hospitals take which insurance and what kind of care can I get. Like, that's just fucking bullshit.
And I've been screaming this from the rooftops since I had any platform at all to anybody who will listen. But healthcare, privatized healthcare is the biggest enemy to capitalism and the free market economy that we have in the United States, because you have a small business and you can't compete for better labor, because a lot of times people need healthcare, and if you're a small business, a lot of times you can't offer healthcare or competitive healthcare, and they would love to work for maybe a few dollars an hour less or a few bucks less a year to be a part of their community, but they physically need their insulin or need whatever, and they have to go work for some big major corporation, and that hurts competition. Or you have the people working for some big major corporation that have a great idea that could open up a business that would really benefit the community and bring new jobs in, and they can't afford to take the risk and leave because they can't afford hundreds or thousands of dollars a month in healthcare premiums. And taking that off the table so anybody can make a competitive business or try to make a competitive business and hire competitive labor would completely revolutionize the world for small businesses and for consumers, and that's something that it's a huge failure of the private industry.
Yeah, private insurance companies, they bring no value to the market. They do nothing. They are a parasite, right? I mean, I don't know. I would love someone that isn't an executive for Blue Cross or another big insurance company explain to me the utility of an insurance company.
To extract wealth from poor people and move it up the ladder.
That is their purpose. Yes. Yeah.
So no, I think that is a great policy to run on, and I think that it especially resonates well with rural communities, small towns, small cities, because you have a lot more people who are self-employed, or you don't have the options to commute to a large city to get a job with a big employer, and that really starts limiting your options when you add that obstacle of needing health insurance to open a business or to be employed, and that just hurts everybody. So I think that's great.
Do you want to know what e-health insurance says? Why health insurance is useful?
I would love to know.
It apparently allows you choice of doctors and hospitals You have a broader choice of healthcare providers with the private insurance, apparently.
You have the opportunity to call lots of healthcare providers and let them tell you that they do not accept your specific plan or insurance.
Right. And that really breaks down in rural America where you do not have choice. You have one healthcare provider, and that's where you go.
Right?
You know, I break my leg, I am not going to look around and see what Duluth has to offer and what Fargo has to offer. I'm going to the Sanford emergency room in Bemidji because that's the only emergency room in Bemidji.
Yeah.
So there is no choice.
Right. And well, and like here
kind of
in my town, even just pharmacy is a great example of this. There's one pharmacy in town. It's Walmart. Otherwise, you're driving, a half hour to Cambridge or something like that. And again, like there's no choice for that kind of thing. There's one clinic in town now, as the other one closed down. It's yeah, you don't have those options, and even when you do have those options, there's no guarantee. Your insurance company tells you who you're going to get to see, what procedures they're going to cover and pay for, and how much you're going to have to chip in if they cover it at all. And yeah, I've never gotten the feeling of choice with private health insurance. Plus, your employer tells you what insurance you're going to get, or you're paying thousands of dollars a month to pay for it yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would love to talk about some of the other policies that I'm promoting as well.
Yeah, of course.
I think childcare. I don't remember if that's still on the website, but
It
that
is.
is a huge need. We did a study when I was a county commissioner. The county did a study on the state of childcare, and much like the homes, we need 1,000 slots just to deal with the amount of children that cannot get into healthcare or into childcare, and that too is an economic barrier. The opposite of a stimulus. Because people can't go to work because it's too expensive. It's cheaper to just stay home and have a single earner. And so if we need to really increase the accessibility and the affordability of childcare everywhere, but in rural Minnesota, it's especially acute. And I know people that are where they're pregnant and they start paying for a child care spot 6 months before they're going to have a kid in that spot because they're trying to save it for them. And so now you're locking that up, and it can't go to a current child because it's being paid for.
Yeah.
So we really need to expand child care in our community. I mentioned we talked a lot about mental health care vis-a-vis homelessness, but we need more mental health care for the non-homeless population and to keep them non-home. And that's a housing prevention. It's also an economic stimulus. I have a very good friend who struggles and right now is not able to work because of a combination of physical and mental health issues, and they really struggle getting the care that they need. We had we have one psychiatrist at our hospital, and he left. I think they replaced him, or they're about to, but we went months without having a psychiatrist in Bemidji. Again, where there's like 50,000 people.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Then we end up going to a triage system where we're only helping the people that are in absolute crisis. And so you have some mild underlying mental health issues. Say, oh, well, we don't have anyone to help you. Come back when it's a 4-alarm fire, and then we'll send you to somewhere else in the state to deal with it. And then now you're pulled away from your family, pulled away from your supports, and
The
so
situation's
we really
much
need to
worse than
tackle
it ever
that
would have
problem.
been, even in that
But
situation.
right. We can't nip it in the bud. We have to wait until it's a fully blossomed crisis, before we can get any help to people.
Well, and at
so
that point, you
all
could
of these things.
have like lost your job or something like that.
Sorry.
Like at that point,
Right.
when
Yes.
it reaches a
No.
crisis.
Absolutely. So that's what I was gonna say. All of these things. That it's not just quality of life. It's also economic stimulus. And so it's by tackling these problems, we're actually the payback is manifold, and it's hitting us in a bunch of different positive areas of. I was talking about home building, the same with shoring up people's mental health, having healthier communities it's the Wellstone thing. You know,
Yeah.
the more, the more we do better. No, shoot, now I'm saying it wrong. Um,
We do better when we all do
the
better.
better we do, the better we do, or whatever. Um, but so that's I don't know if I was telling people, I mentioned the Minnesota Miracle
Hmm.
earlier, and someone told me don't say that because if you're under 40, you don't know, nobody knows what that
Right.
is.
Hmm.
Got me
Well,
as
let's
one of
make it
those.
popular again.
Yeah.
I thought you
Yeah,
were talking
it's
about
a
the
great
Vikings for a second there.
that was the Minneapolis
Oh,
Miracle.
yeah, true. True.
Um, uh, but it is a play on the Minnesota
Hmm.
Miracle. But
Yeah.
yeah, look it up. You'll see a picture of Wendell Anderson, Governor Anderson, on the cover of Time magazine holding a stringer of walleye, and it says like the good life in Minnesota or something
Hmm.
like that.
Mm.
We were the talk of the town or whatever,
Hmm.
for decades because of this like Scandinavian style investment in human and physical infrastructure. Um, let's do it again. It'll
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
fun. You
Hmm.
know,
Right.
people will smile. People have better lives. It'll bring in more revenues, and
Well,
it's just going to be great. Or we
Minnesota
can
has.
keep muddling through this what we're doing nowadays, where everybody's miserable and nobody wants to see anybody else do well.
Right.
Let's all do well.
Right.
That's
Hmm.
because when we all do better, we all do better. That's the Wellstone
There you go.
um,
There you go.
phrase,
Yep.
a
Well,
slogan.
and especially in a time where we have a surplus in our state budget right now,
Hmm.
there's no better time than now. Obviously, the better time would have been
20 years ago.
20 years
Yeah.
ago, but all we can do is now, and right now we have a
That's
surplus in our
yeah.
budget. So let's continue that surplus by investing in our future.
And the last, especially 2023, the having the DFL have control of the government, we were able to make huge investments that haven't been realized yet, but huge investments in housing,
Hmm.
huge investments in education. We really need to hang on to the trifecta of having the
Hmm.
DFL in control because we do stuff. The
Hmm.
Minnesota GOP, they've just turned into an opposition party. All they do is obstruct.
Yeah.
We didn't get a couple really important bills passed this year because of the obstructionism of the minority party. They
Hmm.
do not want to see Minnesota do well. They want to campaign on how horrible life is, on how much Minnesota sucks. My
Hmm.
my opponent last cycle, in 23, he authored a bill that would allow Western counties in Minnesota to secede to the Dakotas. How
Hmm.
is that a policy? How is he not seen as a turncoat?
I and
I mean, that's a treasonous.
it is, and I was like, you realize you could do that, and none of us would even notice. Like, what do you think is going to improve in your situation there? Because you're going to go to a state that has far less resources.
Right. And most of those, we have this. The Republicans tried to push this narrative up here that our tax dollars are going
Mm.
to pay for light rail in Minneapolis or
Hmm.
whatever, which is just not
Yeah.
true.
Hmm.
We receive so much more money than we pay down to St. Paul,
Oh,
and that's
absolutely.
something that is seldom talked about.
Hmm.
We benefit so greatly. So if those western counties were to secede
Hmm.
to the Dakotas, that would bring them down. The
Yeah.
Dakotas would have to spend a lot more money on roads and
Hmm.
bridges in those western counties that right now St. Paul is paying for.
And it would, yeah, and
So
it would
we need
boost
to
the rest of
we,
the state as far as like
right.
resource allocation to everybody else if we did get rid of them, because per
Yep.
capita we spend way more money the
Because
less
we
dense an area is. So, uh-huh.
So
absolutely.
is that your point on your
Um,
website? You have supporting our workers in St. Paul. Is that kind of what you're going for like supporting
Yes, and
workers
we're
in
we're trying
everywhere?
we've been having some problems. I want to amend that because it sounds like I'm saying that we support workers in St. Paul.
Yeah.
But when I'm in St. Paul, I want to do what I can to support workers in Bemidji and Baudette and in
Right.
Red Lake
Hmm.
And in Clearbrook and Gonvick.
Yeah, I had a
So
question
yes,
mark next to that one. And it was one of your like big bold ones. So I was like, I might just point it out there for him, just help you out.
yeah, yes, we're well aware of that grammatical like um, uh, uh,
Yeah.
mistake.
So one
A
thing
little
with
unclear.
childcare, over the winter I like to watch YouTube while I work out, while I'm jogging or whatever, and I came across this video about how childcare in Minnesota in a town called Warren. I don't know if you've heard of it at all, but
Yep.
they're small.
Warren is the northwesternest city in Minnesota.
Oh, shoot, I did not know that. So they apparently
Or that'd be Halleck. No, it's really close to Halleck, but
sure.
yeah, it's in the
It's
northwest.
right up there. So what they did is they raised a levy to build a child care center that would be owned and ran through the city, and then they were able to provide, like
Socialism.
quadruple their child care capabilities from where it had been at a cheaper rate
Hmm.
by putting up this temporary tax to kind of invest in their community. And I was just wondering if you had heard of that, or if you think that's a reasonable model.
No, yeah, I hadn't heard of that. And again, Warren is no bastion of like
No,
tax and spend liberals.
no.
That's a fairly conservative place. While on the county board, we tried really hard to open up a daycare center on the main floor of our social services building, to largely provide health care for or child care for county employees, but also people that work downtown. It fell through. We had a public-private partnership that we were building on, and we were trying to get buy-in from some of the businesses downtown, and we just couldn't get it all together. And it's not totally dead. I think we're trying to figure out how we can get that going again, but
Sure.
but we are going to need to do those public-private partnerships, I think, to accomplish it. And one thing that I think of is like schools. Schools already have the facility; they've got the lunchrooms and stuff. And not that we just want big institutional childcare, but we do need to have institutional childcare and home-based childcare. We need like in so many things, a diversified portfolio.
Yeah.
And so let's just build it where we can, and let's help because right now people in childcare, they do not get paid a whole heck of a lot. They
Yeah.
can't get sick. They can't go on vacation because everybody is depending on them to be there. What can we do to strengthen them, to not make them burn out and allow them to have a satisfying and well-paying career? Because it does pay back such huge dividends. But we are going to need to have state investment in making sure that healthcare work or childcare workers are paid well, and that families can afford the childcare. Because without state support, that model just isn't going to work.
Right. Well, and that's why I really
Because
enjoyed.
we,
The Warren situation in that they socialized the care, and that allowed for them to pay the workers more
Yeah.
because there's no profit that they have to worry about. The profit
Right.
they cover their costs, and they cover the cost of the labor, and that's how much it costs, and that's it. And so
which we kind of need to have the same discussion when it comes to housing. What is the role of housing in America? Is it to house people, or is it to make private equity rich?
Right.
And right now, the fact that housing houses people is almost incidental to the business model.
Yeah.
Housing is there to make a few people very wealthy, and if we house some people along the way, that's fine, I guess. But we really need to change that, and I want to see nonprofits and governments and tribes get into the housing market again, and have a mission of our mission of our organization is to provide housing for people, not to return a dividend to the shareholders. But we need to expand who we see as our stakeholders when it comes to housing, when it comes to childcare. Same with there are some things that should not be privatized and done for healthcare, corrections, education, things like that should not be. We don't make our parks deliver a return. We don't make
Right.
our roads deliver a return. The return is implicit in their
Yeah.
existence.
Right.
It's a return to the community, not to shareholders. And we
No.
need to get back there in so many of our institutions.
Absolutely
completely
couldn't said it
agree.
better.
Well, I think we always do this and get a little carried away and go over time, and we're about a half hour over now. But we really appreciate you coming on, and I think this was a great conversation. I hope you feel it was as well. But
Yes, I really thank you for the opportunity to chat with you all. And I've not been known to to stop talking without telling me directly, someone telling me directly that I have
Goes
to.
both ways.
We're
I'll
just as
just keep
bad.
going.
We are just as bad. So I am.
Especially on topics that interest you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I just want to give you a last chance to kind of plug. If there's a website you want people to go to check you out, your social medias, just throw it all out there
Yeah.
that they can follow you.
Yeah.
The kind of the areas to vote for you when they're looking for you on your November ballot, whatnot.
Yeah, so yeah, please go check out my my website. It is votereedolson.com. And I'm on all the social medias more or less, and it's usually some kind of iteration of Reed for MN2A or something like that. Reed Olson for MN2A. And yeah, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I think that's about it for the social medias that I'm on. But and know that if you live in Minnesota and you want to support a state candidate, that we have a political contribution rebate. So if you give up to $75, Minnesota Revenue will reimburse it. So give me your money, because campaigns take money, and we're always outspent by our Republican opponents, and they run nasty, nasty ads against me, accusing me of all kinds of horrible stuff, and we need to be able to counter that and get our message out there. So please help us out.
Yep, it's free money,
I've got
guys.
an
They
Act Blue
send the
page.
money back, so
Yep.
it's
And
literally
pretty
free
quick.
money.
Once you send the form in, it takes about a week and a half, 2 weeks to get the money back from them. So please do that if you can. If you can't, just tell your friends to get out and vote, and to vote blue. This is every election is the most important election of your lifetime, and this is this is all the more true this time around. So please get out there and vote. Encourage your friends to get out and vote. We need all of the low propensity voters to vote this fall in all jurisdictions, and let's do some good stuff.
All
Thank you
right.
so much for your time, though, fellas. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for your time. Thank you for being a guest. Thank you for kind of giving us your insight on the homelessness thing. I think that was a great topic to cover. And again, thank you for bearing with us through our technical difficulties and hardware difficulties, just getting through the door earlier today and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and you can check out my podcast, which is Rito Roundup, and we're on Podomatic, and you can witness all kinds of audio problems that we've had. Although I think we do a good job of editing them out, but we're no strangers, especially when we've had to do remote interviews like this. It just compounds things. But thank you so much.
Yep, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening, for watching if you watch in video format on YouTube. Otherwise, wherever you get your podcasts, we appreciate you. For everybody who buys merch at offjawagon.com, that helps us out. If you subscribe, we got some subscription options. That helps us out as well. Or, just sending us money. That's always appreciated, too. But the thing we appreciate the most is just tuning in, interacting, watching, listening, commenting, because that's the reason we do it, is because you guys listen to us, and that's what makes it worthwhile. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We love you, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Reed, for being on.